Hello, everyone. My name is Marek Stefan. I'm a deputy editor-in-chief in Układ Sił. And today with me is Professor Hal Brands, the editor of the book, The New Makers of Modern Strategy, the contemporary edition. And this is the Polish edition of this book, Twórcy nowoczesnej strategii od starożytności do ery cyfrowej, wydawnictwo Prześwity, we współpracy z Układem Sił. I would start to our discussion about this book to asking you about the main cause, the main purpose of create such a big book where you collect the most influenced thinkers, strategic thinkers especially from the Anglo-Saxon sphere. What is the history of this series of books? Because I know that this is not the first time when American and Anglo-Saxon strategy decided to brings together a lot of very insightful vision of strategy.
Yep. So this is the third edition of Makers of Modern Strategy, and each of the prior two editions were published at times of great global crisis, when the need for good strategy and for deep reflection on strategy was clearly apparent. And so the first edition was published in 1943, obviously at the height of World War II, at a time when the democratic world, and really the United States in particular, was relatively new to the idea of global strategy or grand strategy, and also needed an education in the realities of military affairs. And that was really the purpose that the first edition served. The second edition was published in 1986, in many ways at the climax of the next great global crisis, which was the Cold War. And many of the essays in that book spoke to particular strategic challenges of the Cold War, whether guerrilla warfare or nuclear strategy. The idea for a third edition really began to originate in the mid-2010s, and the thinking was that we had entered a new era of geopolitical rivalry. The unipolar moment of the post-Cold War era was fading. Russia and China and other actors were challenging the American-led world order. International peace and security were no longer a sure thing. And so it was important to rediscover the study of strategy, because the United States and like-minded countries would need strategic competency to survive and thrive in the years ahead.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned about the strategy and the grand strategy. Could you explain the difference between of these two terms?
Sure. So strategy, I just like to think of as the art of using what you have to get what you want in a world that may be set on denying you. And so it's how you use the assets at your disposal to accomplish some important objective, understanding that other states or other actors may be pursuing their own agendas that may be opposed to yours. Grand strategy is really about integrating strategies into a larger overall conception of foreign policy or statecraft. And so it involves using all of the tools of national power, but also, particularly for a global power like the United States, ensuring that the strategies you may be pursuing in different theaters come together in a larger global conception of what the United States is trying to achieve in the world. So there's an integrating function to grand strategy, which really elevates at a level above pure strategy.
Mm-hmm. In this book, but also in a previous edition, I see the one pattern that in every edition of the Makers of Modern Strategy, we see that the core stone is the remembrance of the heritage of the ancient times, especially Thucydides, Peloponnesian War, about Roman Empire. How this ancient heritage has influenced the modern strategy, especially US strategy and grand strategy also.
Well, I think it depends on sort of which strategic thinkers you're talking about. But in general, the value of studying classic texts of grand strategy is the sense that they illustrate something timeless, something that is useful and valuable when applied in any age. And so that may be Clausewitz's insight that war is always should be subordinate to politics. It could be Machiavelli's insights about the need to sometimes use ruthless means in the service of worthy ends. It could be the insights that Thucydides offers about the causes of great power, war. We tend to come back to these texts because we think that they contain some larger meaning that can help us make sense of challenges in our own time, whether that is the challenge of waging war against Iran in the Persian Gulf or the challenge of great power rivalry with China today.
Mm-hmm. So my question is now about the grand strategy of the United States. Do you see, and could you explain what is the main, undoubtedly, the main point of U.S. grand strategy, especially if we're talking about U.S. Foreign policy towards Eurasia powers? Could you explain how it's working and what is the roots of thinking about Eurasia in American strategic thinking and strategic debate?
So traditionally, or at least for the last century or so, the U.S. has had an interest in preventing any hostile power or powers from dominating the Eurasian supercontinent or some crucial region within it, because the fear was that if a bad actor was able to do that, they would be able to generate the resources and the power necessary to threaten the United States on a global scale. And in fact, the United States had some experience with that in the way that Germany was able to threaten its sea lanes to Europe in both World War I and World War II, and then of course the way that Japan challenged for hegemony in East Asia and ultimately attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor in 1941. And so the United States set about trying to preserve favorable Eurasian balances of power in key regions as a way of preventing those sorts of scenarios from emerging again. And one of the key tools of doing so was the alliance structure that the United States built principally in Europe and East Asia after World War II. The reason there is such uncertainty about American foreign policy today is that I think there is a debate going in the United States about whether those alliances and those forward commitments still serve U.S. interests. I would argue that they do. I think the United States has an enduring interest in preventing the Eurasian supercontinent from falling into chaos or becoming a place of outright predation again. But there's a more robust debate around those issues and the degree to which the United States should invest its own military and economic resources in sustaining Eurasian balances of power today than there has been in many years.
Mm-hmm. This book is about strategy, so also about the war. We see now, in my opinion, the next phase of the revolution of military affairs. I'm wondering that you agree with me, but I see some links between war on Ukraine and war in the Persian Gulf from this perspective, because Ukraine and Iran, it's, on the paper, on the pure statistics, the middle powers are very weak states. Especially if we compare Iran to United States, even to Israel, or Ukraine to Russia. But by using some kind of the strategy to and implement some new technologies, drones especially, cheap but mass producing weapon. From your perspective, this is something important if we want to understand the character of the conflict in the 21st century now.
Yeah, I think it is important, and I think one of the sort of the rules of history is that technology constantly evolves, and as it evolves, it changes the way that war and statecraft are conducted. And so in the 20th century, understandings of geography and conflict were transformed by long-range air power, for instance, or by the advent of steam power before that, which allowed navies to roam more broadly than they had before. And now in the 21st century, our understanding of conflict and the meaning of geography is being challenged by a variety of new technologies. It could be drones and missiles, which place U.S. forward bases at risk in the Persian Gulf and other areas. It may be the rise of precise mass or mass precision or whatever one wants to call it, or the ability to deliver precise blows using cheap, attritable platforms. It could be the advent of artificial intelligence and the way that it is likely to accelerate the speed of conflict. What we also see, though, is that many key strategic imperatives remain the same. Technology may change, but figuring out how to allocate scarce resources across a number of challenges, that's an enduring strategic preoccupation. Leadership and choice will still matter, even in an era of drones and missiles. And so technology constantly changes, but in many ways, strategy is more of a constant challenge, and many of the particular requirements of good strategy remain the same over time as well.
Mm-hmm. If we see what happens in the Persian Gulf, but also previous in the past time, when we see the outcomes of many periphery conflicts where United States decided to use the force. Some experts claim that United States has some problem to implement correct strategy to how to use force, how to achieve the political goals. Do you agree with that?
It's hard to agree or disagree with it as a general statement. There are certain instances in which the United States has conducted effective strategy in the past 25 years, and there are certain instances in which it has not. It would be hard to argue that the U.S. has thrived strategically in the most recent conflict with Iran, in part because I'm not sure that the U.S. really had a meaningful strategic concept going into the war beyond hit the Iranian regime as hard as you can and see what happens. And when that didn't prove to be decisive, when that proved to be a misconception of how the war would play out, the United States was essentially left grasping for answers to the closure of Hormuz and other challenges that Iran presented. And so in that case, I think the U.S. suffered from an excessive faith in what superior technology and sort of an attempted knockout blow in the early rounds of the fight could achieve.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about the strategy and, of course, the foreign policy and the strategy, we also focus on the great powers. When I read this book, I also have some thoughts that this is the book, especially from the perspective of the great power. But do you see any space for the middle powers like Poland, especially if and I'm back to my previous question about the revolution of the military affairs. Maybe this kind of changing in the military balance of power, the new technologies, create some chance for middle powers like Poland, for example, like Ukraine, to survive in the jungle of the international politics.
Yeah, strategy has never been the exclusive preoccupation of great powers. And I think that's one of the things actually that the book makes fairly clear. And so, there are investigations in the new Makers of Modern Strategy of the strategies of Native American nations during the 19th century, or, relatively small rogue states like North Korea and the survival strategy that it has pursued. And in fact, for smaller, weaker, more vulnerable actors, the stakes of strategy are actually higher than they are for great powers, because getting it wrong can be extremely damaging or even fatal. And so I've always made the argument that there is as much that middle powers or even small powers can learn from the study of strategy, as there is that great powers can learn from strategy.
Professor Brands, thank you for this conversation. And we also recommend the Polish edition of this book, Twórcy nowoczesnej strategii od starożytności do ery cyfrowej. Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you.
Thank you very much.